My brother recently sent me a meme with some insightful comments attached, but the meme showed this old woman holding produce in a garden of sorts. And the text overlay said, "Grandma survived the Great Depression because her supply chain was local and she knew how to do stuff." My brother pointed out that after the original sin, God cursed the ground and he had man toil for his food. And he rightly mentioned that as the kingdom of heaven has grown, this curse has been greatly alleviated with modern machinery and other advances, to the point where we have surpluses of food. And with these supply chain shortages, we may have to return to growing food locally. And this is a real possibility, but we need to recognize that this is a curse. Growing food locally is not inherently bad. This is not a screed against that. But if on a national scale we return to toiling in our own local gardens, it's because God's cursed us. Furthermore, knowing how to grow food locally isn't going to help you if God is determined to curse you. If he wants to starve a people, he's going to starve you. It doesn't matter if you have a local garden. So these covenantal aspects need to be in the forefront of our mind as we consider what's happening in the world. And among conservative reactionaries, I think there exists an underlying ingratitude for the abundance of wealth that we have as a result of the free market in a global economy. That God has used free markets and the diversity of labor to raise the standard of living for everyone is an incontestable fact. But there is this tendency among reactionaries to romanticize toiling for our food, of homesteading, of even withdrawing from the city, as if growing your own food is something more pure and wholesome than the marketplace. It's similar to how liberals envision Native American Indians living in some utopia before the white man showed up and screwed it all up, when in reality the Christians are the one who brought the utopia. And the free market global economy is another glimpse of that utopia, of the kingdom of heaven, that is routinely, in my estimation, disparaged wrongly. The trajectory of all of history is from garden to city, not from city to garden. Of course, most of us don't grow our own food or know how to, and that's fine. We're in the new heavens where we can drive in our self-propelled chariots to the marketplace and get hundreds of carrots out of the marketplace if we wanted to. We don't have to spend all day trying to get a few carrots out. We can go and get as many as we want. And since we're not all toiling in our local gardens, we have what economists called opportunity cost that we're able to take advantage of. We're not all toiling in our gardens, so we can do things like cure polio and build rockets. These things are raising the standard of living for everybody. The diversity of labor in a free market is a means of maximizing the wealth for everyone because we're not all toiling for food. And it is not the free market in itself that gives us these things, but the Spirit of God, which transforms men to be able to cooperate with one another, to serve one another, and to trust one another. This is one of the things that guys like Bastiat or von Mises don't account for in their arguments for free markets, that the Spirit of God really is the invisible hand in the market, is the indispensable component that causes these things to happen. In other words, free markets are not going to exist in the way that they want them to in non-Christian societies. And that's what we're seeing now. We're starting to see the breakdown of the free market. And so you have people saying, free market's bad, but it's really just that we're bad. We are sinful, and so we have this breakdown of supply chains and things like this. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the breakdown of supply chains. And since your local pastor is a covenant breaker, we could face even more kinds of famines. This is what God does when his people sin. We face famines. We face supply chain shortages. The Midianites come in and they take all the harvest. This is what happens when God's people are unfaithful. But I'm not worried. I have zero anxiety about this. God provides for his faithful remnant. And this is not a banal platitude. This is scripture. This is the history of God's people. He's faithful to his remnant. He gives Joseph warnings in dreams through Pharaoh that a drought's coming, and Joseph prepares accordingly. He wasn't caught off guard by the supply chain shortage that happened in Egypt. He knew it was coming. God told him it was coming, and he provided for him and provided for his family. Even in the midst of what they were trying to do in an evil kind of way, what they meant for evil, God meant for good. This is how God works with his people. God gave his people water in the desert. He gave them manna in the desert. He had ravens bring Elisha meat and bread when there was a drought in Israel. And later, the widow's jar of flour and oil never ran out until God brought rain again. Jesus feeds 5,000 people miraculously, and the very next day, his disciples are like, what are we going to do? And Jesus is upset with them for not understanding this. Jesus says, don't worry about these things. Stop. What are we going to eat? What are we going to drink? He says, don't fear. Stop worrying. How many times does Jesus have to say this? How many times does God have to show us that he provides for his faithful servants before we actually believe it? The church is in unrepentant sin, and so with these supply shortages, we face the possibility of famine or having to toil in our local gardens. And we deserve it if it comes. But if it comes, we need to remember that God does not destroy the righteous with the wicked. This reminds us of our need to confess.